On the hotline, author alert. I'm being told we have the author of a book called High Bias, The Distorted History of the Cassette Tape. Are we being joined by Marc Masters right now?
Hey, Tom, can you hear me?
I can. Welcome to the best show, Marc.
Cool. Thanks so much for having me.
Of course. Now, you wrote a book called High Bias, and it's about the cassette tape.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to just say this. I wrote a blurb for this. And
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and it's a great book, and I was honored to write a blurb for this book. And tell us about what made cassettes so appealing to you. Like what was it that made them something that you wanted to dedicate this much focus and this much energy toward, when for some people they're going to go, oh, cassettes, what a faulty medium.
Yeah. Well, that right there is part of what made me want to write the book. They get a bad rap, and they shouldn't. They changed everything, really.
Yeah. How would you say?
And they still are changing things.
And they still are. How would you say? Because the book is very interesting. There's an aspect to cassettes that you might not think about. They provided the first liberation in music.
Yeah. Yeah, completely. I mean, before cassettes, I don't think people who weren't around at the time might not imagine it, but you couldn't really control the music that you heard. You buy a record, you had to listen to what was on the record, or you had to listen to what was on the radio. You couldn't make your own mixes of music. You couldn't record yourself playing music. You couldn't. I mean, it could all happen, but you had to have like reel-to-reel decks that were impossible to operate unless you were a pro, and pretty expensive too. So cassettes made it so everybody could control the way they heard music, the way they made music, where they took the music. I mean, you really couldn't listen to music outside your house that much other than the radio in your car until Walkman came along, boomboxes came along, and those didn't exist before tapes. And
at that point, up until that point, you were truly at the mercy of whatever the radio was playing when you left your house.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and then I mean, when I was a kid and got a little cassette deck, I set it next to my radio and I would record songs that way. That's the first way I ever made any mixtapes.
Mm-hmm.
And then I could listen to those again rather than have to wait for the song to come back on the radio.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal, you know.
Because one thing that I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say there was so much gatekeeping when you think about it in terms of the hardware, in the consumption and distribution of music. It was a one-way street. They told you how you were going to consume music and how you were going to program music. The cassette broke that stuff wide open, and the idea of there was no such thing as a mixtape until there was a cassette that you could have a mixtape. Because like you said, reel-to-reels, of course, they were around, but who's lugging around a 90-pound reel-to-reel unit that's also expensive and fragile? Cassettes were self-contained.
Yep. Yeah, and I mean, it for people who weren't around at the time, it might sound a little hyperbolic to say that they controlled everything, but all you have to do is look at how they responded, how the industry reacted when cassette tapes came out. They flipped out. They wanted to basically shame people into not using them.
Yeah, there was a campaign.
Pretty much.
What was the campaign called?
Home taping is killing music, and they had a little cassette with a skull and crossbones around it. Mm-hmm. And also at the bottom of the ad, it said, and it's illegal, which wasn't true. But, you know, they were hoping to scare enough people.
They were hoping to scare people
check and see if it's legal.
In terms of thinking that the labels held some sort of copyright on you. You were violating something by quote unquote, distributing it by by just recontextualizing it, by playing an LP and recording it, or recording 2 songs off of it and doing whatever you wanted with it. Suddenly the power was in the consumer's hands, and that terrified the music industry. But that was, how badly did the music industry actually get hit by the cassette revolution?
Well, I mean, that's the thing that they would claim. They gussied up all these studies that said they were losing billions of dollars a year, but nobody outside of the industry ever did a credible study that said that it was really that bad. And nobody also ever studied, well, was this making people buy more music because they can actually tape more records from their friends, and learn about more bands and find out about more things, go see them in concert, things like that, to counteract it. So, I mean, my perspective is that it helped them as much as it hurt them, if it hurt them at all. But nobody ever really came up with any concrete numbers. I mean, how do you even really study something like that, even though the industry claimed it studied it over and over? But it's not very credible.
No, I can only say the amount of times I was given a mixtape, and then it's just a case of, who's that? Write it down. Look, go get that album. Who's that? Go get the record. Buy anything by them, because I love that song. They really were just this amazing gift to music lovers.
Yeah, absolutely. And they also turned into this thing where artists like hip hop artists, indie rock artists, go-go artists, all these different artists decide, if they weren't getting any attention from the industry, they're just going to tape their own music, make dubs of it, pass it around, sell it on the street, get it outside of the channels that were saying that they couldn't be involved in the whole thing.
That's the other part of it too, is it put power in the hands of people who were least, who had the least access to expensive equipment. It was very freeing in that regard also, to where now you have a movement like hip hop that was not universally accepted when it started, and always had an element of people needing to kind of grind out their path to getting heard. And you're never going to get something that has curses or whatever played on the radio. So chasing that is just a fool's errand. But mixtapes, and then they transitioned into the CDRs as time went on. That really turned people on to so much music also, that was just sold hand to hand. Because if you couldn't afford to press your record up, this is the fastest way to get it out there. Yeah, it's funny. I think that maybe the industry was maybe crossing their fingers that the audio quality of tapes would discourage people from using them that way. I mean, the guy who invented it actually thought it was just going to be for voice recording. But you know how most creative musicians are, that's not going to be a barrier to them. The barrier is money. And if you can do something without spending a lot of money, worrying about how good it sounds, and who even determines what sounds good or what sounds bad. I mean, a lot of people like the way cassette sounds and like the way it changed the way their music sounded and took advantage of all the anomalies in it. And so it was a way to not only just to bypass having to pay to go in the studio or to press your records, a way to make something aesthetically different than what you could do in the studio. Absolutely. It put you were able to have somebody like Lou Barlow, who had a band that put albums out in the proper form with Dinosaur Jr., but he was able to cultivate his whole Sebadoh Centrido thing on cassette. You had Daniel Johnston as one of the all-time great stories with cassettes. That's where his genius was revealed, and nobody was going to be pressing those up on vinyl at that point or making CDs of them. It put the stuff out there, and it's affordable too. It's affordable.
Yep. And portable, Daniel Johnston could stick them in the McDonald's bags where he was working in McDonald's and hand them out to people that way. Sometimes I think people didn't even know they were getting a cassette until they reached in to get a hamburger. You couldn't do that with a record.
That would have been the most amazing thing, to reach in. When he worked at the McDonald's in Austin, he would drop cassettes of his music. Could you imagine reaching in to take out your quarter pounder and you're like, what is this? Like, what is this, like a Happy Meal thing? You're like, no, this looks weird. And it's a cassette. I wonder how people's minds were blown by that, who popped the cassette into the into their car stereo.
Right. Yeah. I'm sort of shocked that no one has saved one of those bags. You would think one person would have hipped themselves enough to it to be like, I'm going to hold on to this, because that'd probably be a valuable McDonald's bag if you still have that.
My God. Yeah, that would be so fun. So funny that's how you got turned on to the music of Daniel Johnston. Shrimper was another cassette label that meant the world to me over time, because they were
great.
They were putting out cassette comps. It made it so you could just take a fly. You could have your band. It didn't have to be the most serious thing in the world, and you could just put it on a cassette and get it out there. And it wasn't as precious in a way.
Right.
And then there's just the sheer act of people recording at home. They had their own recording facility now in their house for the first time ever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's funny, I knew Shrimper at the time when they were making tapes. I loved their tapes, but it wasn't until I talked to Dennis from the label for this book that I found out most of their tapes had been dubbed over pre-recorded remainder tapes that he could buy from the boss at his job, a bunch of cutouts that, he could buy for $1 a piece or whatever. And he would just dub his releases over those tapes. And sometimes you could actually still hear some of the music that was on them originally in the gaps and things like that.
Yeah, it was pretty. It was a pretty amazing time and a great way to learn about music without breaking the bank. Also, because the cassettes would be $5, $4, $3. You'd buy them postage paid. They just drop them in a little mailer, and you get some cassettes sent to you. Low overhead for everybody. Marc.
Yeah, and then
tell us a crazy thing about cassettes that nobody would expect to know that's in this book, High Bias.
A crazy thing about cassettes no one would expect to know. That's a good one. Well, there's the cool, if you want to, I can think of sort of individual stories. There's that amazing story about a guy I know, Jed Bindeman, who's in the book, who he sort of collects tapes from the 80s and 90s, kind of seeks out things that only came out in editions of, 10, 20, or even just one copy. And his girlfriend was in a Goodwill, and they were taking a bin of stuff out that hadn't sold on the shelves. And it's like, last chance, you can either grab stuff out of here or it's going in the landfill. She found a cassette, brought it home. It looked interesting. It was just a handwritten cassette. And it turned out to be these songs by this woman, Carola Bear, who they didn't even know her name at the time, but Jed figured out a way to track her down and really loved the music. And he repressed it as an album. It is really good, and she is pretty convinced it was the only copy. So it was about 5 minutes away from not existing anymore, and now you can get it again.
That's amazing,
or for the first time, really.
And I'll say there's a ton of stories like that. You have a ton of stories like that in the book, where because the other final thing I'll say, cassettes are also a global phenomenon, and they've made it possible for artists in different countries who have even less resources to spread their music around.
Yeah. And in the case of a lot of countries, cassettes some things only came out on cassette because the state media or the record companies, who were often controlled by the state, wouldn't put out certain styles of music because they thought it wasn't appropriate. It was too lo-fi, too vulgar even. And so some of these artists, really prolific artists, only put stuff out on cassette. And if you can't find the cassette anymore, that stuff is gone. And cassette's like a worldwide archive in a way. And most of them do hold up despite their reputation. I've got tapes from the 80s that still play fine.
Yeah, no, it is a little bit of a little whatever you want to call it, misrepresentation of cassettes, that they're more durable than people give them credit for. My favorite final thing is like the Bruce Springsteen, when he recorded Nebraska, that was a cassette.
Right.
He recorded it. He walked around with that same cassette. Literally, he didn't dub a copy of it. He sent the copy that was the recorded version of the music, the only existing copy of it, mails it to his manager. Imagine if that cassette got lost in the mail. Then Nebraska never comes out. Mails it to his manager. There's something going on here, Bruce. This is interesting. Then takes the cassette, puts it in his winter coat without a case, and there's lint getting caught in the cassette. Plays it for the E Street Band. Hey, let's learn how to take this. Let's take the songs I recorded and turn them into full band arrangements. Couldn't capture the magic of what he recorded on that cassette. And I would say arguably top peak form Springsteen, Nebraska, just recorded on a lowly cassette.
Yeah. I mean, I love how one of his engineers was like, the better it sounded, the worse. When they tried to make it better, it just sounded worse. It never sounded as good as that cassette when they tried to do it in studios.
So then they just they got the equipment, the necessary equipment to just get the music off of that cassette to where they could press it on vinyl. So yeah, it's an amazing story you put together here. All the stuff about the cassette.
Oh, thanks.
It's seriously interesting, and I'm a fan, Mark. And it's called High Bias: The Distorted History of the Cassette Tape. It's out now. It's a book out now. You should
that's right.
Check it out. Well, Mark,
can I plug my Bandcamp site for it?
I wish you
real
could.
Quick.
No, of course you can.
Okay. So if you go to highbiasbook.bandcamp.com, you can get a signed copy from me. And also I put out a companion cassette of some of the music from the more recent tape labels that I talk about in the book. And you can get that there too.
That's amazing. And everybody should check it out. Thank you for coming on, Mark.
Cool. Well, thanks so much for having me, Tom. Great to talk to you.
Okay. I'll talk to you soon. Good guy. Good guy. Good guy. Good guy. Let's play some music and then we will be back. We'll be back in a moment. Let's play